Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Mind, Body, Soul Healing. I wanted to share something with you. Yesterday, my betta fish died, and I was absolutely devastated. I was bawling my eyes out because almost 2 years ago now, I ended an almost 15-year relationship. And when I first moved into my apartment, the very first time that I ever lived completely on my own, this fish was my first little friend in the apartment to help me feel less lonely and afraid. Somebody that I could come home to and say hi to, and he would wave at me with his little fins, and I just absolutely adored him. So it was a huge loss for me. And normally, in the way that I would cope with things in the past, I would resort to drugs and alcohol to help deal with the emotions that I was facing from my loss. And very luckily, yesterday, I was teaching 2 classes in the morning. So one thing that I was taught during my 200-hour yoga training from an amazing instructor named Ron Reed, he was the one that went over our pranayama training, our breathwork training, is change the breath and change the emotion. And so getting to teach those 2 classes and being in the present moment and being with breath and being with my body really helped me to be in a different headspace. And although I was still feeling grief, I didn't have to feel like I wasn't able to sit with that grief. And that is a really important part of the journey of healing through addiction or healing through trauma, is being able to sit with the feelings that you're having. When I first started my journey towards sobriety, I remember saying that I wasn't used to ever sitting with the emotions that I was having from my previous trauma, my sexual assault. And I was having a ton of flashbacks to what had happened, and I felt extremely overwhelmed to be going through those flashbacks and feeling those feelings and not knowing how to sit with it. And having my yoga practice and my breathwork practice to very heavily lean on during that time was huge for me. Another thing, when I first moved into this apartment, I was gifted this book, The Body Keeps Score. And I haven't read it yet. So it's been almost 2 years since I've had this book, and I have not read it. I generally like to read one book at a time. And right now I'm reading the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And so I'm almost done. But something is very heavily calling me to read this book and to share the reading of this book with all of you. So, The Body Keeps Score, Brain, Mind, and a Body in the Healing of Trauma. So, let us begin. Prologue, Facing Trauma. One does not have to be a combat soldier or visit a refugee camp in Syria or the Congo to encounter trauma. Trauma happens to us, our friends, our families, and our neighbors. Research by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has shown that 1 in 5 Americans was sexually molested as a child. 1 in 4 was beaten by a parent to the point of a mark being left on their body. And 1 in 3 couples engage in physical violence. 1/4 of us grew up with alcoholic relatives, and 1 of 8 witnessed their mother being beaten or hit. Already that puts a lot into perspective of how much we are not alone in this journey. We have each other, and there are so many people in this world that have experienced trauma in some way, shape, or form. As human beings, we belong to an extremely resilient species. Since time immemorial, we have rebounded from our relentless wars, countless disasters, both natural and man-made, and the violence and betrayal in our own lives. But traumatic experiences do leave traces, whether on a large scale, on our histories and cultures, or close to home, on our families, with dark secrets being imperceptibly passed down through generations. They also leave traces on our minds and emotions, on our capacity for joy and intimacy, and even on our biology and immune systems. Trauma affects not only those who are directly exposed to it, but also those around them. Soldiers returning home from combat may frighten their families with their rages and emotional absence. The wives of men who suffer from PTSD tend to become depressed, and the children of depressed mothers are at risk of growing up insecure and anxious. Having been exposed to family violence as a child often makes it difficult to establish stable, trusting relationships as an adult. Trauma, by definition, is unbearable and intolerable. Most rape victims, combat soldiers, and children who have been molested become so upset when they think about what they experienced that they try to push it out of their minds, trying to act as if nothing happened and move on. It takes tremendous energy to keep functioning while carrying the memory of terror and the shame of utter weakness and vulnerability. While we all want to move beyond trauma, the part of our brain that is devoted to ensuring our survival, deep below our rational brain, is not very good at denial. Long after a traumatic experience is over, it may be reactivated at the slightest hint of danger and mobilize disturbed brain circuits and secrete massive amounts of stress hormones. This precipitates unpleasant emotions, intense physical sensations, and impulsive and aggressive actions. These post-traumatic reactions feel incomprehensible and overwhelming. Feeling out of control, survivors of trauma often begin to fear that they are damaged to the core and beyond redemption. I'm actually going to share something with you very, very deeply personal to me that reminds me of. Give me one moment, please. This is a journal that I got years and years and years ago, and I really should write in it more often because even after years, it's only maybe half full. But my very first entry into this journal is, what do I do? How do I feel? Where do I start? When will it end? Is there hope for me? What do I deserve? Am I worthy of love, happiness, peace? All I feel worthy of is pain, hate. Everyone is in it for themselves. Take, take, take. All I do is take. Hate. I hate myself. No love. Unworthy. Tainted. And then I wrote across it in giant letters, tainted. So Yes, absolutely. Being raised with an alcoholic mother and being sexually assaulted at a young age and all of the other things that has happened to me throughout my life has most certainly affected how I am and how I feel as an adult. The first time I remember being drawn to study medicine was at a summer camp when I was about 14 years old. I'm back to the book now. My cousin Michael kept me up all night explaining the intricacies of how kidneys work, how they secrete the body's waste materials and then reabsorb the chemicals that keep the system in balance. I was riveted by this account of miraculous way the body functions. Later, during every stage of my medical training, whether I was studying surgery, cardiology, or pediatrics, it was obvious to me that the key to healing was understanding how the human organism works. When I began my psychiatry rotation, however, I was struck by the contrast between the incredible complexity of the mind and the ways that we human beings are connected and attached to one another, and how little psychiatrists knew about the origins of the problems they were treating. Would it be possible one day to know as much about our brains, minds, and love as we do about other systems that make up our organism? We are obviously still years from attaining that sort of detailed understanding, but the birth of these three new branches of science has led to an explosion of knowledge about the effects of psychological trauma, abuse, and neglect. Those new disciplines are neuroscience, the study of how the brain supports mental processes, developmental psychopathology, the study of the impact of adverse experiences on the development of mind and brain, and interpersonal neurobiology, the study of how our behavior influences the emotions, biology, and mindsets of those around us. Research from these new disciplines has revealed that trauma produces actual physiological changes, including a recalibration of the brain's alarm system, an increase in stress hormone activity, and alterations in the system that filters relevant information from irrelevant. We know now that trauma compromises the brain area that communicates the physical, embodied feelings of being alive. These changes explain why traumatized individuals become hypervigilant to threat at the expense of spontaneously engaging in their day-to-day lives. They also help us understand why traumatized people so often keep repeating the same problems and have such trouble learning from experience. We now know that their behaviors are not the result of moral failings or signs of lack of willpower or bad character. They are caused by actual changes in the brain. This vast increase in our knowledge about the basic processes that underlie trauma has also opened up new possibilities to palliate or even reverse the damage. We can now develop methods and experiences that utilize the brain's own natural neuroplasticity to help survivors feel fully alive in the present and move on with their lives. There are fundamentally three avenues. Number 1, top down, by talking, reconnecting or connecting with others, and allowing ourselves to know and understand what is going on with us while processing the memories of trauma. 2, by taking medications that shut down inappropriate alarm reactions, or by utilizing other technologies that change the way the brain organizes information. And 3, bottom up, by allowing the body to have experiences that deeply and viscerally contradict the helplessness, rage, or collapse that result from trauma. Which one of these is best for any particular survival? And an empirical question. Most people I have worked with require a combination. This has been my life's work. In this effort, I have been supported by my colleagues and students at the Trauma Center, which I founded 30 years ago. Together, we have treated thousands of traumatized children and adults, victims of child abuse, natural disasters, wars, accidents, and human trafficking, people who have suffered assaults by intimates and strangers. We have long tradition of discussing all our patients in great depth at weekly treatment team meetings and carefully tracking how well different forms of treatment work for particular individuals. Our principal mission has been to take care of the children and adults who have come to us for treatment. But from the very beginning, we have also dedicated our lives to conducting research to explore the effects of traumatic stress on different populations and determine what treatments work for whom. We have been supported by research grants from the National Institute of Mental Health, the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, the Centers for Disease Control, and a number of private foundations to study the efficacy of many different forms of treatment, from medications to talking to yoga, EMDR, theater, and neurofeedback. The challenge is, how can people gain control over the residues of past trauma and return to being masters of their own ship? Talking, understanding, and human connections and drugs can dampen hyperactive alarm systems. But we will also see that the imprints from the past can be transformed by having physical experiences that directly contradict the helplessness, rage, and collapse that are part of trauma, and thereby regaining self-mastery. I have no preferred treatment modality, as no single approach fits everybody, but I practice all the forms of treatment that I discuss in this book. Each one of them can produce profound changes, depending on the nature of the particular problem and the makeup of the individual person. I wrote this book to serve as both a guide and an invitation to dedicate ourselves to facing the reality of trauma, to explore how best to treat it, and to commit ourselves as a society to using every means we have to prevent it. So that was the prologue. I am going to read, I believe, maybe a chapter a week of this book, and I hope that we can learn something from this together, and I hope that you find it as helpful as I already have connected to and believe will be helpful for me too. Thanks until we meet again. Take care.